National Child Protection Week is commemorated in the country annually to raise awareness of the rights of children as set out in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and Children's Act. This year's event kicks off from today until June the 6th. Joining us now for a conversation around the theme of this year's Child Protection Week are Josh Ramsey of Be in Touch, UNICEF representative in South Africa, Christine Muhigana, Human Rights Commission CEO, Adv Tseliso Thipanyane, and Riaan Bergh of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, FEDSAS. Ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Adv Tseliso, I'd like to start off with you. South Africa has excellent laws, and it is said a national action plan to prevent and respond to violence against children. Is this happening? Is this law being affected?
Well, thank you, and good afternoon to your viewers. Well, we certainly have good laws in our country and institutions, and certainly some work has been done to advance the rights of children. But on the main, I think we are, as a country, as institutions, as a people, we're definitely failing our children, because these are the future of our country, and therefore the way we raise them also affects how they're going to conduct themselves. And therefore the massive challenges around the realization of human rights for children, issues of violence and abuse of children, is really a setback as far as we are concerned as a Human Rights Commission. And therefore there's a lot which needs to be done to basically change the situation, because as you rightly say, in the Constitution, the rights of children in our country are paramount over everything else. But clearly, the conduct of ourselves as government, as institutions, in terms of policy and allocation of resources, clearly shows that there is a lack of deeper appreciation of the importance of putting children first.
Now, Christine, you're an advocacy primarily. What is UNICEF doing? What is the progress that you've certainly observed in the last few years from the efforts that you're making?
I think what we need to acknowledge most is the fact that there is much more or many more actors out there with whom we can partner to do the work that we want to do to protect children from violence, from exploitation, from trafficking, from exposure to risks that put their well-being, mental health at risk. The governments with whom we work in the various countries where we operate are, of course, with us. In this case, this morning, for the launch of the Child Protection Week, I was with the Deputy Minister of Social Development of South Africa. So we work hand in hand with them and with many actors in civil society, private sector, academia, to make sure that we together, as a whole society, address the issues of affecting children.
I like the fact that you work hand in hand together with the government to address some of these issues, but studies find that 34.5% of all children have been abused. Now, this statistic is too high. It's shocking. What work is actually being done? Because one would suggest that it's a lot of talk and no real action.
Yes, it is a shocking statistic. One child that's victim of violence, of deprivation is one child too many. But there is work that's being done. This morning for the launch, we visited 2 child and youth care centers, primarily supported by the government, by social development, but also by civil society organizations. They host children, they provide a multi-sectoral response to the needs of children. They provide health services, they provide education. They have psychologists, psychiatrists on call also to support the children that they host. Of course, it's not enough. There are many children out there that need support. We need to make sure that we continue to be there for them, even when they leave such centers, when they try to, reintegrate their families, their communities. we also need to make sure that we prevent what happens to these children, and that make them, have to resort to being hosted in centers where they're cared for away from their families, from their parents. So making sure that families are strengthened, families are empowered. Those who under stress because they're poor, because they lack the livelihoods that they need to support their children, that they give them. So we need to make sure that we're there in a holistic manner to prevent and to see early signs of distress in children, so that we can, when possible, support them in their families, in their communities, as opposed to put them in institutions.
Josh, once a year we come together in a week such as this to remember children. It's clearly not enough.
Absolutely, and I think the reason we're excited about Child Protection Week is that it highlights the why. The how can always be figured out, and there's always going to be ways to improve that. But that statistic that you just heard, 34%, that's a why number. And that's the information that we need to know out there to drive parents' awareness, parental awareness, educational awareness, institutional awareness. If we don't know why we need to be protecting children and what's actually happening on the ground, we're not going to be doing anything about it. The how of how we implement child protection, that will come a lot easier when we know the why and we're driving the why. And that's what Child Protection Week is about. And that's why we're excited to be a part of it and support all these initiatives to help activate parents, educators, institution directors, everyone that we can, to say this is why it's so crucial that we take action.
Riaan, you're firmly on the ground working with schools. What is the picture actually like? Because all too often we look at statistics, but there are millions, hundreds of thousands of unreported cases.
Yes, I think we've got to have a clear view of what goes on in our schools. And sadly, our country is very diversified and spread across a wide sector of society where in some schools you've got 5, 6, 7 different types of homes represented. So from school to school there is a difference, but within a school you could have from very rich learners to very poor learners to exposed learners. So on the ground we see quite a few interesting statistics when it comes to feeding schemes at school, when it comes to handing out of clothes and shoes, when it comes to care packages, and when it comes to child abuse. So I think for us it's very important that the issue is an ongoing issue, but that we highlight it during this week, that we have a look at ourselves as society. School is not a different silo from society, but school is a reflection of society, and that's where we see it play out. So we're really keen to be part of this initiative and really driving the initiative so that we can keep the discussion lively and talk to learners that might not be exposed to these problems, because somewhere around them there is someone that is in need of support. So yeah, let's keep the conversation alive, not just during this week, but for the following weeks and months to come.
I'm going to read something that I picked up from the internet around a reaction by President Cyril Ramaphosa back in 2019 after the rape and murder of UCT student Uyenene Mhwechana in the Cape Town post office. And President Ramaphosa pledged millions to strengthen the criminal justice system and to provide better care for victims. Aren't we pulling the cart before the horse, so to speak? Surely we should be putting millions into preventative measures as opposed to trying to deal with an already existing situation. Let's not have the situation altogether. Advocate, your thoughts on that?
No, certainly prevention is better than cure. I would like to say that, the sums which the president has talked about for protection should actually be maybe 5 times more for prevention. Because really it starts in the home. That's why the basis of child rights says, children must be raised up in an environment which would help them to become better citizens of the country. And therefore, if we create children, if we raise up children in an environment which is really not in their interest, we're basically harming society. And therefore, we must remember, no one is born a criminal. but society produces criminals. And therefore, how we raise children in this country will depend what kind of future leaders we'll have, whether we have corrupt people, killers, and abuse of children. It all depends really on how we raise children. And therefore, we need to invest a lot more in early development of children.
Josh, how do you see us dealing with that issue, certainly when it comes to early development, as the advocates have said?
Absolutely. There has to be an emphasis on relationship building. And again, that's where the why is so important. So whether it's the relationship between educators and student, parents and children, there has to be meaning and authenticity and vulnerability shared there so that we can leverage relationships to change behavior. I think one of the big aspects of this, which we have no statistics really that reveal the reality, is child minding via digital devices. So in the work that we do in schools and the statistics that we gather, we're seeing that there's an overwhelming majority of children have access to devices late at night without any parental supervision. And they are getting access to content that is influencing how they interact with their peers. I would go as far as to say we've got a bit of an epidemic with pornography exposure in our youngsters, and that is driving how they interact with one another. Online gender-based violence is bred out of the media that these children are watching, particularly the boys. And they are getting ideas about what relationship is, what intimacy is, what consent is, boundaries, and they are modeling their behavior on what they see online. And they don't have those kind of close relationships with educators, with parents, to guide them through, listen, this is how relationships work, this is how consent works. And so I think this comes back to equipping parents back into their role of taking responsibility for monitoring and managing children interact with devices as well as one another.
Christine, coming to you, there's obviously a lot of work that you do which is dealing with existing situations. Do you do any preventative work, any advocacy work around the various abuses not actually taking place?
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with the two speakers who spoke with that before me. To prevent children from enduring adversities, we all must continue to challenge the harmful social norms that reward, unfortunately, now in many of our societies, abusive behavior and the perpetuation of toxic masculinity, and which drive gender inequality and violence in societies. We know that that's all of that is what usually happens in the homes and exposes children to violence that they then themselves perpetuate, so that they see things and they do the same things themselves with their peers or when they grow up. As my colleagues have said, we need to strengthen families, and that's what we work with a number of our partners, so that these families are able to take full responsibility in creating loving and nurturing environments for children. And at the same time, we also need to strengthen the statutory child protection system when children are hurt or when themselves are found to be in contravention with the law, to make sure that we still consider and recognize that these are children and they need to be supported in the way they correct course in the way they behave in society and with each other. And as Josh was saying, many of us and many children, families are moving to a virtual mode of working, of learning, of socializing, and it's really critical to sensitize all children and their caregivers, the people around them, on how to keep children safe online.
That's going to be pretty interesting, because we're struggling to keep children safe before we go to the new normal. That discussion and so much more when we come back with my panel of experts. Stay with us. National Child Protection Week is commemorated in the country annually to raise awareness of the rights of children as set out in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and Children's Act. On the show this afternoon, we continue our conversation with a number of experts. Josh Ramsey of Be in Touch, UNICEF representative in South Africa, Christine Muhigana, Human Rights Commission CEO, Adv Tseliso Thipanyane, and Riaan van der Bergh of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South Africa. Riaan, my next question is to you. Are we geared up to protect our children in this country?
I don't think we've got an option. I think it's not just a constitutional position and a dream and a hope we have, but I don't think the question is whether we are geared up. It's the question of how we're going to get geared up. And I think what Christine has been saying is that we've got to put some fundamentals in place in our families, in our society. What Josh has been saying about online safety, I think, yes, we are geared for that. Our society doesn't have a safety problem in the physical and a different safety problem in the virtual. Our lives are online. Our lives are mobile. So that's part of the whole safety discussion. It's not a separate discussion to say, let's have child online safety as if child physical safety has been sorted out. So I think we've got to get geared. Yes, I think we can do more. Our schools, the lockdown period has shown us that school fulfills so much more than just an academical role. It's a social structure. It's a social construct. It's a safe haven. There's strong relationship between teachers and learners and learners and learners. So yes, we've got to protect our schools. We've got to protect the functioning on that side where we are working. But then I agree that society also needs to do more. And yeah, are we geared? Maybe we can do more. But do we have an option? Not a chance. Our children are a national asset, and we've got to protect them with what we can throw to this problem.
Now, my next question really is around abuse patterns between demographics. Riaan, coming back to you, would abuse in public schools be any different to the abuse that kids would experience in private schools?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily a public school, independent school discussion. It's a value discussion. And we've been driving the thought process and the whole situation about let's not be rule-based institutions. Yes, we need some rules, but let's change the heart by means of instilling good values. So a problem that might arise at a public school might just have a different nuance and flavor, but it comes from the same root of the value of disrespect, of not having compassion, of being selfish, and that sort of thing. And that raises the issues of bullying and all the difficult things we see, unfortunately, too often in the news. So we don't necessarily believe that there's a difference in society from independent schools to public schools. But society is made up of a lot of different diverse people, and we should embrace the diversity in our country. Our constitution is clear about that, and not just highlight there's no problems in this school and many problems in this school. It might be that the volume of the problems are different, but the root of the problem still stays the same. And we need to produce a value-driven education society.
But it's also equally important not to couch the discussion or hide behind issues, but look at what is actually practical. Advocate, I obviously would like to know from you, I mean, just picking up from what Riaan has said, there seems to be a softer side that we might not be looking at, which is the value system. If we create laws and you manage, obviously, the human rights of South African citizens. Now, a lot of the laws are put in place because people potentially will break the laws. But if they have the right values, then there will be no need for laws because they are not breaking those rules. What are we doing outside of the hard sell, which is putting laws in place, but looking at equipping individuals with the value set that seeks to protect children?
No, definitely. The value set, as far as I'm concerned, it is the most important thing, really, as far as promoting and protecting child rights. And I think a lot more has to be done in that regard. I mean, laws will always be there, but when there are no cops around, what determines how we conduct ourselves is our value system. And we definitely have to invest a lot more in schools at home. Now, we as a Human Rights Commission are part of a project with Department of Education where we run a school mood competition where we teach learners about human rights with an attempt to try and change the mindset. So if you look at our constitution, it says, must create a culture of human rights. You cannot create a culture of human rights without values of respect, without values of caring for another person, without values of being a good person. And that's what we need to inculcate, not only in our children, but also in our officials, in government, in everybody else. When I was young, we used to go to school without fear of anything. Nowadays, it's almost impossible. And that actually shows that there's a problem with our value system. That's what I was saying earlier on. We really need to invest a lot more in our value systems. And of course, and also, as other people were saying, that we need to also enforce our protection systems in order to make sure that, those who break these value systems then get into problems. So, for example, if you look at the investigation we're having in Limpopo, where a learner committed suicide, that's a value system. A child gets bullied, nothing happens to the child, and the child commits suicide. Where was government? Where were the teachers? Where was everybody else? Where were the parents? These are value issues. So I would want to say, as somebody used to say before, it's about the economy. Here it's about values. Thanks.
Very, very interesting development there. Christine, something I'd like to throw at you is around children being able to protect themselves. Maybe not physically, but certainly via awareness of what their rights are and what uncle or aunt cannot do to their person.
Yeah, absolutely. And the value system that that we were just talking about, that you were just referring to, is something that needs to be instilled in us, from childhood. So we need to know what the values are, and we need to also know, as you say, what it is that is right and wrong, whether it comes from somebody outside of the home, outside of the family, or also inside of the family. So it's very important that children know their rights, that this is something that's part of the curriculum in school, but also something that is carried by the society, by the communities at large. It's about education. It's about what it is that we tell our children is right and wrong, and if they are wronged, how they can reach out for help, for support. Childlines South Africa, for example, is a great partner here. Children should know that this is a resource that they have access to, and helps in the protection system that we have in place.
Now, parenting is really is one of those things where you have no real experience when you get into it, outside of the parents that raised you, or the guardians that raised you. There probably isn't a lot. Josh, to start with you, what is the one thing that you feel that parents are not doing enough of, that needs to be done to curtail the challenge that we have?
I'd say one of the biggest problems that we face in the conversations that we have with parents is that parents are simply unaware. They were raised with don't eat sugar, don't spend too much in the sun, put on sunscreen and wear a seatbelt. And they are raising children that are in a technology age that they are completely unprepared for. So I would say one of the big challenges that we face is educating parents on the need for their digital parenting role, and for them to understand that the children are learning their value system online from the content that they're consuming there. And parents need to be asking more questions about their children's lives. There's a very powerful statement that comes out of the work of two authors that form the backbone of our work. And it's basically this: if parents do not know what is going on in their children's online lives, chances are they don't know what's going on in their children's lives at all. And when I say that into a hall of parents, you can hear a pin drop, because it's true and it hurts to admit it. And parents need to realize if they don't have any clue about what's going on in their children's lives, it means that they don't have the kind of trust relationship that's required. So how do you build that trust relationship? You open your heart. You have to share with your child your own struggles, your own perspectives, and ask open-ended questions that invite them to speak about their lives. Don't let them get in the car or get home and say, how was school? Yes, no, good, bad. Ask them, what's going on in your life? What's the most interesting thing you've seen lately? What's the craziest thing your friends are doing right now? Anything to give them space to explain their reality so that you can cross that bridge, and so that when that cyberbullying or bullying thing happens, and it will happen, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, they'll come to you and they'll say, Mom, I've got a problem. Dad, I've got a problem.
Adv Tseliso, I'm going to come to you for our final question and ask everyone else to contribute to that. Something that Josh has obviously raised is around the issues of children's rights. Do you or do you not look at your child's device? Do you not or do you spare the rod? Your sentiments on how you deal with that aspect of things.
Well, what you hear, what you see, and what you learn. And therefore, I'm a parent. I've got a 16-year-old child. Definitely, I don't dispense a physical punishment, and I try and speak to my child and guide my child, because I guess the point Josh was saying is the why. Why do we raise children? For what? And therefore, if you understand the value and the importance of raising children in a proper manner, then you are able to engage in all aspects which affect the child, because ultimately, that's how the child is going to become later on, whether you're an abuser or a good person. And therefore, we do need, and I think this is what Riaan was saying, or Josh, that we do need to engage with our children. It's a very important social value or capital issues which we have to deal with. We have to invest a lot more in how we raise our children, because we're definitely shaping future leaders of our country. And therefore, the future of our country really depends on how we raise children and how, as a state, we ensure that children are able to grow in a conducive environment, whether in the family or outside the family.
Riaan, where do you draw the line between sound parenting and the rights of your child or a child?
I don't think it's an or. I think it's an and. And sound parenting includes raising a child that can make a contribution in this country. The child only has rights because other children also have rights. And if you raise your child to infringe on someone else's right, you've not given them more rights, you have actually taken away all of our rights, because then we've got to police it more. So, yeah, I don't think one should stop the discussion, but it's not an or issue. I think good parenting, strict parenting, engaged parenting, loving parenting, as well as giving rights to learners so that they understand what their contribution is, their responsibilities, not just their consuming of the right is. So I think it's a very much deeper discussion than just does my child have all the rights? I'm also a parent. I've got a 10 and an 11-year-old, and it's a difficult thing. Today is tech-free Sunday in my house. So drawing lines, making just putting boundaries in place to say let's look at what we do. So yeah, definitely not an or, but an and issue.
I like the idea of the tech-free Sunday. I may not be too popular going forward, but certainly makes a lot of sense. Christine, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what my colleagues are saying. You have to be guided by what's in the best interest of our children, what's in the best interest of our families, in what's in the best interest of promoting positive values for our societies, for our communities, for our countries, so that we move forward together, bringing in everybody. And yes, finding the right, as Riaan was saying, balancing act between what's good for you and what's good for the rest of the people in the community, in the society. That includes children and those around them.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. We were discussing Child Protection Week with Josh Ramsey of Be in Touch, UNICEF representative in South Africa, Christine Muhigana, Human Rights Commission CEO, Adv Tseliso Thipanyane, and Riaan of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, FEDSAS.